What happens when art dives so deep into the forbidden that even censors can't keep up? The exploitation boom of the 60s and 70s gave birth to films so raw, so chaotic, they blurred the line between rebellion and madness. These movies weren't made for comfort. They were made to shock, awaken, and sometimes offend. Tonight we uncover 13 graphic and raunchy exploitation classics, still free to watch if you dare. Number 13. Faster, Pussycat, Kill Kill. 1965. No film captured the wild heart of exploitation cinema like Faster, Pussycat, Kill Kill. Directed by Russ Meyer, it exploded onto drive-in screens with a roar of engines and a fury of women who refused to be tamed. Critics dismissed it as trashy sleaze, yet under its surface beat the pulse of a feminist revolution in leather and desert dust. The film followed three go-go dancers turned criminals who embark on a violent rampage through the California desert. Their leader Varla, played by Tura Satana, became an icon of dominance, a force of nature who crushed every man foolish enough to challenge her. Audiences had never seen women like this. No victims, no sweetness, just power and rage. But here's where the trouble began. Censors across America branded it obscene. Drive-in owners were raided. Some states banned it outright, accusing Meyer of glorifying violence and immorality. Yet, the more they tried to suppress it, the more audiences sought it out. Bootleg reels traveled underground. Midnight screenings turned it into legend. Behind the scenes, Satana performed her own stunts. She fought real bikers during filming and nearly died in one desert crash. Her bruises became part of the movie's myth. Decades later, Quentin Tarantino and John Waters both called it one of the greatest films ever made. What began as exploitation became liberation. Faster, Pussycat, Kill. Kill proved that rebellion could wear mascara and still break bones. Number 12. I Spit on Your Grave, 1978. When this film appeared, it was not just controversial, it was radioactive. Released under the original title Day of the Woman, it followed a young writer who seeks brutal revenge on her attackers. Critics walked out, some fainted, and others swore the director should be arrested. Yet beneath the outrage lay a grim reflection of a world already broken. Shot on a shoestring budget in rural New York, it felt disturbingly real. Director Raunchy claimed he based it on a true incident he once witnessed. Every frame was drenched in grit and silence. No soundtrack, no comfort. Only tension, building like a scream. Censors across continents pounced. Britain's board banned it for decades, calling it the most vile film ever made. Australia followed. Even American theaters refused to screen it unless entire reels were cut. But bootleg VHS tapes spread faster than police could seize them. It became a whispered legend, the movie people dared each other to finish. Behind the chaos actress, Camille Keaton endured isolation and fear during production. She described it years later as a psychological ordeal, but also a defiant statement of survival. Critics eventually revisited the film, recognizing its unfiltered anger as social commentary rather than pure exploitation. Today it stands not as a celebration of cruelty, but as an indictment of it. A mirror held too close for comfort, and once seen, it is impossible to forget. Number 11. The Last House on the Left. 1972. Before Wes Craven redefined horror with Nightmare on Elm Street, he made something darker. The Last House on the Left began as a small independent thriller, but quickly became one of the most banned and debated films in history. Its tagline promised to keep telling yourself, it's only a movie, but few could. The story followed two teenage girls kidnapped by a gang of killers. When the villains take refuge at one girl's home, her parents discover the truth and unleash their own revenge. What started as a tragedy turned into an explosion of primal violence that left audiences stunned. Inspired loosely by Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring, Craven shot it with documentary realism. Handheld cameras, grainy film stock, and no musical cues. It felt like news footage from hell. Viewers stumbled out of screenings pale and shaken. Some theaters stopped mid-reel after audience members fainted. Censors in Britain, France, and Germany banned it outright. American TV networks refused even to air ads. Craven himself received death threats. Yet underground fans traded battered VHS copies, whispering that it was too real to be fiction. The film's notoriety grew until it became a cornerstone of grindhouse lore. Years later, critics re-evaluated it as a disturbing masterpiece about vengeance and moral decay. Without it, horror cinema might never have evolved into the psychological battlegrounds of the 80s. The Last House on the Left was not entertainment, it was confrontation. And it forced audiences to ask who the real monsters were. Number 10. Cannibal Holocaust, 1980. This was the film that blurred the line between fiction and crime scene. Directed by Ruggero Deodato, it was shot in the Amazon jungle and told through the footage of a lost film crew who vanished while making a documentary about indigenous tribes. What audiences saw felt too real, too horrifying, too raw for the screen. Upon release in Italy, police confiscated every print. Rumors spread that the actors had actually been killed. Deodato was arrested and charged with murder. To prove his innocence, he had to bring the cast members to court alive. That was how convincing it was. Its realism changed horror forever. Beyond the shock lay a grim commentary. It attacked the Western media's obsession with exploiting suffering for spectacle. Yet, that message was drowned by outrage. Countries from Britain to New Zealand banned it for decades. Animal rights groups protested after reports surfaced of genuine animal deaths during filming. Even today, it remains censored in several nations. Behind the chaos, the production was pure madness. The crew faced disease heat and hostility from locals. Cameras jammed, actors fainted. And at one point, Deodato nearly drowned filming a scene in the river. Yet, what emerged was unlike anything before it. It became the blueprint for the found footage genre, later inspiring movies like The Blair Witch Project. Love it or hate it, Cannibal Holocaust still haunts cinema. It proved that when you chase truth too far, you might find horror waiting on the other side. Number 9. Ilsa, She-Wolf of the SS, 1975. From the ashes of post-war shock cinema came something darker and more divisive. Ilsa She-Wolf of the SS combined exploitation with war imagery so extreme that even grindhouse veterans were stunned. Starring Diane Thorne, it told the story of a sadistic female warden running human experiments inside a Nazi prison camp. It was marketed as a revenge fantasy, but delivered a nightmare of cruelty and control. Shot on the leftover sets from the classic Hogan's Heroes, the film transformed comedy scenery into hell. Critics were outraged. Newspapers called for it to be burned. Governments across Europe banned it under obscenity laws. Canada seized prints at customs. Britain listed it among the notorious video nasties. Behind the scenes, chaos ruled. The script was written in a week. Thorne nearly quit over the content, but director Don Edmonds convinced her it was a statement about fascism disguised as pulp. On set, temperatures soared over 100 degrees. Actors fainted. Equipment broke down. But production pressed on, knowing controversy would sell. When it premiered, the backlash was instant, yet underground fans turned it into legend. Midnight theaters sold out. Bootleg tapes circulated worldwide. It spawned sequels set everywhere from deserts to harems, turning Ilsa into an unlikely cult anti-hero. Today, the film is remembered not for shock value alone, but for exposing how easily authority and obsession can corrupt humanity. It stands as one of exploitation cinema's most disturbing mirrors to power gone mad. Number 8. Coffee, 1973. If exploitation had a queen, her name was Coffee. Directed by Jack Hill and starring Pam Grier, this film exploded with confidence, fury, and beauty. Grier played a nurse who turns vigilante after drug dealers destroy her family. What followed was a whirlwind of revenge, corruption, and unstoppable style. Coffee wasn't banned. It was feared. Studio executives called it too bold, too violent, too political. Audiences called it revolutionary. For the first time, a black woman dominated the screen as both hero and executioner. Grier's performance redefined power in cinema. Every line, every glare was electric, but not everyone cheered. Some critics accused it of glamorizing violence. Others claimed it exploited racial tension for profit. Police unions condemned its portrayal of corruption. TV networks refused to show trailers, yet in the streets audiences celebrated. They saw truth in Coffee's rage, a reflection of systems that had failed them. Behind the camera, Jack Hill fought studio censorship daily. Producers demanded edits to soften Greer's character. He refused. Greer herself performed most stunts, risking injury in high-speed chases and explosive shootouts. When the film finally hit theaters, it shattered expectations. It earned millions on a tiny budget and launched the blaxploitation wave that reshaped American cinema. Greer became the face of strength, intelligence, and survival. Decades later, Quentin Tarantino would call her the goddess of action, casting her and Jackie Brown as tribute. Coffey's legacy burns brighter than ever. It proved that revenge can be righteous, and that power once taken away can roar back louder than the system that silenced it. Number 7. The Big Doll House, 1971. When American audiences thought they had seen it all, Roger Corman sent them to the tropics for something even more dangerous. The Big Doll House was filmed in the Philippines and turned the women in prison genre into pure chaos. Directed by Jack Hill, it starred Pam Grier in one of her earliest roles, surrounded by heat, sweat, and rebellion. The plot followed a group of female inmates plotting escape from a brutal tropical prison ruled by corrupt guards and a sadistic warden. But this was no simple pulp. It was rebellion disguised as entertainment. The prisoners represented the oppressed fighting back against the system itself. Audiences didn't expect social commentary. They expected shock. What they got was both. Censors in several countries tried to shut it down. Britain's film board called it indecent. Some American states demanded scenes be removed for violence and humiliation. But every cut only made audiences hungrier. Drive-in theaters turned it into an event. Lines stretched for blocks. Critics sneered while fans cheered. Behind the scenes, production was equally unhinged. Filmed in real jungle conditions, actors battled leeches and heat stroke. The cast performed grueling stunts while insects swarmed around cameras. Pam Grier almost quit after collapsing during a rainstorm shoot. Yet she stayed, knowing it would make her a star. The Big Doll House paved the way for a new kind of heroine, not polished, not perfect, but furious and alive. Today it's seen as the film that launched the women's revenge wave of the 70s. Beneath its exploitation surface, it whispered a truth Hollywood feared. Freedom always comes with a price. Number 6. The Toxic Avenger, 1984. Trauma entertainment was never known for subtlety, but The Toxic Avenger turned low-budget chaos into cultural revolution. Directed by Lloyd Kaufman, this offbeat film told the story of a bullied janitor in a New Jersey gym who falls into toxic waste and becomes a deformed superhero. It was grotesque, hilarious, and fearless. At first, it bombed. Theatrical distributors refused to touch it, calling it garbage cinema. Reviewers walked out. But something strange happened. College towns embraced it. Midnight screenings exploded with laughter and cheers. The more critics attacked it, the more people lined up. It became the definition of cult classic. Censors hated it. The gore was too much. The humor too savage. Germany banned it outright. Britain followed. Even cable networks refused to show it uncensored. But Kaufman didn't care. He marketed it himself, city by city, and built an empire out of shock value. Behind the scenes, actors risked serious injury. Real fires burned uncontrolled. Prosthetics melted under studio lights. Crew members worked with almost no budget scavenging props from junkyards. Yet out of that chaos came something magical. It was punk cinema at its purest. The Toxic Avenger gave birth to an entire franchise, cartoons, comics, sequels, and even a musical. Its message was simple but sharp. The monsters aren't the deformed, they're the corrupt. It proved that heroism could rise from garbage when society throws away its outcasts. Number 5. Ms. 45, 1981. Few exploitation films carried as much fury and tragedy as Ms. 45. Directed by Abel Ferrara, it was shot on the grim streets of New York during its darkest years. The film followed Thana, a mute seamstress who becomes a silent avenger after a life-shattering trauma. Played by Zoe Lund, she turned vengeance into poetry and pain into power. When it premiered, it was too raw for mainstream audiences. Critics were split. Some called it a masterpiece, others labeled it dangerous. Police groups protested, religious boards condemned it. Yet the underground recognized its brilliance. The silence of its heroine made her rage universal. She said nothing, yet spoke for millions. Censors in several cities cut entire reels claiming it glorified vigilantism. One theater chain refused to book it unless Ferrara removed the ending. He refused. The film's raw energy drew crowds anyway. Fans passed it between friends on battered VHS tapes. It became part of the city's mythology whispered about in downtown bars and art houses. Behind the scenes, Zoe Lund gave everything. She wrote notes for Ferrara's next projects, even composing her own music cues. The shoot was fast, dangerous, and real. Many of the extras were actual New Yorkers, unaware they were being filmed. The tension was authentic. Decades later, Ms. 45 was rediscovered as a feminist noir masterpiece. It inspired filmmakers from Quentin Tarantino to Nicholas Winding Refn. What began as exploitation became revelation. Thana's final act of defiance still echoes through cinema, as a reminder that silence can be louder than any scream. Number 4. Thriller. A Cruel Picture, 1973. Sweden was not the place one expected to birth one of the most violent cult films of the century. Yet, that was where. Thriller. A Cruel Picture was born. Directed by Bo Arne Vibenius, this revenge odyssey followed a mute woman named Madeleine, who, after being forced into a life of degradation, transforms herself into a calculating assassin. It was ice-cold vengeance carved into celluloid. When it premiered, Scandinavian audiences were horrified. Critics called it a national embarrassment. Newspapers refused to print its title. Even the Swedish government tried to erase its existence, labeling it obscene. The studio was raided. Prints were seized. But the harder they tried to bury it, the faster its legend spread. The film was constructed like a silent scream. Vibenius used long, slow-motion shots, extreme close-ups, and haunting silence to pull the audience into Madeleine's fractured mind. The result was hypnotic and disturbing. No Hollywood gloss, no moral lesson, only survival. Behind the scenes, the production was chaotic. Lead actress Christina Lindberg was barely 20 years old, yet her performance was fearless. She spent weeks learning martial arts, gun handling, and car stunts. Vibenius ran the set with military precision. Crew members later said the director treated the shoot like psychological warfare, but the intensity produced something unforgettable. When the film crossed borders, it became a sensation in underground circles. Grindhouse theaters in New York and Tokyo rebranded it as They Call Her One Eye and sold out for weeks. Decades later, Quentin Tarantino would cite it as inspiration for Kill Bill, even borrowing Lindbergh's iconic eye patch. Thriller. A Cruel Picture is more than shock. It is trauma weaponized into art. It stands as proof that sometimes the most unsettling stories are the ones that refuse to be silenced. Number 3. Switchblade Sisters. 1975. Few films captured rebellion with such reckless joy as Switchblade Sisters. Directed by Jack Hill, it told the story of teenage girl gangs in Los Angeles carving their own path through chaos, loyalty, and betrayal. Released in the middle of the blaxploitation and biker film era, it fused every wild idea of the 70s into one electric explosion. The movie followed Lace and her gang, the Dagger Debs, as they battled rivals cops and corrupt politicians. It was violent, emotional, and strangely empowering. The women were tough, unpredictable, and fearless. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Was it satire or shock? Was it empowerment or exploitation? The confusion only made it more fascinating. When it hit theaters, the public wasn't ready. Conservative groups protested outside cinemas, calling it an attack on morality. The film's posters featuring armed women and slogans about revolution were ripped down by city officials. In some regions, censors demanded entire scenes be cut. The studio barely managed a limited release. Behind the camera, the chaos continued. Jack Hill clashed with producers who wanted more shock, less substance. He resisted turning the film into cartoon violence, and instead gave it heart. The young cast, including Robbie Lee and Monica Gale, formed real bonds during filming, often improvising lines that gave the story raw energy. It flopped in its initial release, but time transformed it. In the 90s, Quentin Tarantino rediscovered the film, reissued it through his Rolling Thunder Pictures label, and introduced it to a new generation. Suddenly, Switchblade Sisters became a cult classic hailed for its fierce feminism and pulp poetry. It remains a cinematic rally cry, a film that turned delinquency into freedom and proved that rebellion sometimes looks best in denim and danger. Number 2. Emmanuelle and the Last Cannibals, 1977. By the late 70s, Italian director Joe D'Amato had already shocked audiences with gothic horror and pulp adventures, but nothing prepared viewers for Emmanuelle and the Last Cannibals. Mixing jungle horror with European glamour, it told the story of a journalist who uncovers a lost tribe with a taste for outsiders. What began as sensual escapism turned into one of the most outrageous mashups in exploitation history. Shot deep in the jungles of Italy's low-budget sets and stitched together with stock footage, it was a fever dream of confusion and audacity. The cinematography was surreal, glowing with tropical sunlight, while danger lurked in every shadow. Critics dismissed it as insanity. Censors treated it like contraband. In Britain, it was immediately banned under the Obscene Publications Act. In the United States, distributors panicked. The MPAA refused certification unless D'Amato cut nearly 20 minutes. He refused. Instead, he released it uncut in grindhouses, where it became an instant curiosity. Crowds lined up to see the film newspapers called "too shocking to exist." It became a rite of passage for underground fans. Behind the scenes, the crew battled extreme conditions. Jungle heat destroyed cameras, props melted. Actors suffered insect bites and fevers. D'Amato shot fast, using improvisation for survival. According to cast interviews, he barely slept finishing each day with rolls of film drenched in sweat. For decades, the film vanished. Then, in the digital era, collectors restored it, frame by frame, unveiling its bizarre mix of horror, satire, and adventure. Critics today view it as a relic of cinematic excess, a time capsule of fearless filmmaking before corporate control took over. Emmanuelle and the Last Cannibals remains one of the strangest movies ever made. It dared to merge beauty and horror until audiences could not tell where fascination ended and fear began. Number 1. Pink Flamingos, 1972. There are cult films, and then there is Pink Flamingos. Directed by John Waters, this underground shock masterpiece redefined bad taste forever. It didn't just push boundaries, it blew them up with glitter and gasoline. Shot in Baltimore on a shoestring budget, it followed Divine, a self-proclaimed criminal who fights to defend her title, as the filthiest person alive. The result was part grotesque comedy, part social riot, and part cinematic dare. When it premiered, even hardened critics were shaken. Viewers fainted. Some theaters banned it mid-screening. Police threatened arrests. Yet, for every offended audience member, there were two who could not look away. Its absurdity was hypnotic. The laughter was nervous but contagious. The censors' reaction was explosive. Maryland officials called it moral pollution. Britain banned it entirely for over a decade. Australia's board destroyed every imported print. In America, some states demanded police escort screenings, fearing riots. But fans smuggled reels and played them secretly in midnight showings where laughter mixed with rebellion. Behind the scenes, the chaos was glorious. Waters and his cast of Dreamlanders were friends, not professionals. They lived on peanut butter sandwiches and filmed in abandoned houses. Divine's costumes were handmade from thrift store rejects. Crew members risked arrest during scenes shot without permits. Yet every frame crackled with energy and defiance. Decades later, Pink Flamingos became a landmark preserved by the National Film Registry. Waters himself would call it an experiment in anarchy. It wasn't just shock for shock's sake. It was a protest against conformity, a declaration that cinema could be as filthy as freedom itself. Today, its legacy remains unmatched. It taught the world that art isn't about approval, it's about nerve. Pink Flamingos remains the ultimate rebellion, flick a glitter-stained middle finger to polite society, and proof that sometimes chaos is the purest form of expression. So, what do these wild, forgotten films teach us? That cinema's soul was never clean. It lived in rebellion, grime, and courage. These stories were banned, shamed, and nearly erased, but they survived because truth never stays buried for long. Which of these cult legends shocked you most? Tell us below. Like, subscribe, and join us for more Forbidden Cinema Unveiled.